Under the low July sun, where the wind brushed dry mesquite leaves like whispered prayers, Caleb Stone rode his mare slowly across the silent gut of Quicksand Valley, New Mexico, 1,888. His saddle creaked beneath the lean of his body, and dust curled up in lazy swirls around the horse's hooves. He wasn't headed anywhere, not really, just letting the silence stretch like taffy between the canyon walls, as he always did on the 17th of July, a date no one remembered but him. Caleb had been alone long enough to know that solitude wasn't quiet. It had a sound, a steady, crawling thing, like regret chewing through timber walls in the dark. Today, that sound was wrong. His mare, Dusty, stopped without command. Her ears twitched. Nostrils flared. She smelled something. If you feel something in your chest reading this already, drop a comment with one below Wild West. Love is where the broken hearts of the frontier come alive. Caleb narrowed his eyes under the brim of his battered Stetson, the leather edges chewed by time and habit. All he saw was flat, pale land stretched to God's own end, the kind of earth that didn't forgive footprints or secrets. Still, the hair on his arms lifted. Just before he nudged Dusty to move on, he heard it, a rasp. Too soft to be speech, not wind, not a coyote, a plea made of breath and grit. Caleb dismounted in one smooth motion, boots hitting dirt with the weight of memory. His knees found the sand, and he crouched low, eyes scanning the ground like a man who'd seen too much and trusted too little. The rasp again, fainter now. Then he saw it. Eyes, human, wide and brown, clotted at the corners with dust and sun-scabbed tears. He froze. The breath caught in his chest felt like a sin. A woman. She was buried up to her collarbones in sand, throat straining with the shallowest breath. No tracks around her, no tire ruts, no sign of a struggle. Just her, as if the earth had decided to grow a bride out of its grief. She didn't blink, didn't cry, didn't beg. Caleb dropped beside her. The sun bit into his back as his fingers tore into the caked soil. It was packed tight, deliberate. Whoever buried her had taken their time. Her white dress, what little he could see, was stained at the seams and yellowing in the midday glare. Lace at the collar, a silver rosary wrapped around one wrist, barely visible beneath the crust. Her veil, if it could still be called that, fluttered weakly in the sagebrush to the side like it was waving surrender. She'd been here not for hours, but days. Her lips were split, skin burned. A line of blood, dried now, marked one nostril. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, unblinking. He spoke first, his voice low and hoarse. "Can you move your fingers?" A slight tremble. "Good." He dug faster. "You alone?" No answer. That silence cut sharper than a Bowie knife. He wasn't sure if she couldn't speak or chose not to. Sand gave way to her ribs, then her waist. He eased her out inch by inch, lifting her limp frame like lifting prayer from a grave. She didn't resist, didn't collapse, just endured. He wrapped her in his poncho, lifting her onto Dusty's saddle like she weighed no more than a whisper. Her head rested against the horn of the saddle, eyes still open but flickering now, dazed. "Hold on," he muttered, voice low. "Ain't far. Merritt." Back at the Cabina Crooked Shack near Deadwood Wash, the wood gray with age and wind-carved initials of men long buried, Caleb carried her inside. The place smelled of coffee grounds, sweat, and the musk of solitude. He laid her on the cot, covered her with his spare quilt. Faded red and blue patches, stitched years ago by hands that once knew care. He didn't ask questions, just boiled water, brewed chamomile tea with a pinch of yerba buena he'd traded from a trader passing through Socorro. She sipped slow, silent. Later, when the sun dipped behind the cliffs and cast the shack in gold and shadow, she spoke. Her voice was raw silk, torn at the edges. "You didn't ask who I was." Caleb didn't look up from the fire, didn't figure it mattered yet. "Pause. My name is Serafina Vargas." He finally looked at her. "You Mexican?" A slight nod. "From Doña Ana. My father was a muleteer. He died on the trail. Mama sold tamales in the plaza. I cooked." "What happened?" he asked, more gently than he thought he could. She hesitated. Her eyes met Heasoned in them. He saw a blaze trying hard not to burn. I saw something I wasn't meant to, she said. A coach robbery outside of Hatch. They shot the driver, took the chest, left no witness except me. You were with them? Her stare sharpened. Number I was passing through with a cousin. They killed him too. I ran. But someone told them I was a liability. Caleb leaned back against the log wall. So they buried you. They meant to let the sand do the killing. For a moment, the fire cracked, and neither of them breathed. He looked down at his hand scarred, calloused, lined with the tremble of old battles. I know something about being left for dead. She tilted her head. You military? Cavalry. 3rd unit out of Fort Bliss. Till we got sold out near Galena Ridge. Lost my entire team. Only me and the buzzard saw sunrise the next day. She didn't ask more. Just sipped the last of the tea. Eyes distant. What's in the bag? He asked, nodding to the small leather satchel still clutched in her lap. Serafina hesitated, then held it out. Inside, a faded map scrawled in ink, edges charred, and a brass compass, old and dented, but inside the lid, hidden beneath the needle, was a folded slip of paper. Caleb raised a brow. You know what this is? She nodded quietly. They talked about it. A stash, old Confederate gold, buried somewhere south of El Malpais. Why keep it? Because, she looked down at her hands, because if I survive, I want to matter. I want this to mean something. The words weren't said for pity. They landed in Caleb like buckshot deep and sudden. She wasn't just running, she was fighting to exist. His jaw tightened. He stood, walking to the door. The sky outside bled into indigo, stars pricking holes in the dusk. Behind him, Serafina asked softly, Why did you save me? Caleb didn't turn. His voice was rough as gravel. Because I saw your eyes, and I knew. Knew what? That if I left you there, I'd be burying someone else, someone I lost. A beat of silence. Then Serafina said, her voice clear and certain now, I'm not a ghost. Caleb nodded, still facing the dark. Neither am I. Not anymore. The second morning rose slow and red, the way it always did in Quicksand Valley, like blood seeping under a saloon door after a bad hand of poker. The wind had died down, but the heat had returned with a vengeance, curling off the dry earth in waves thick enough to see. Inside the shack it was still. Only the faint scrape of spoon against tin cup broke the silence. Serafina sat cross-legged on the cot, quilt around her shoulders like armor. Her cheeks had taken on color, again faint, like rose petals pressed in an old Bible. Her lips were no longer cracked, but she still moved like a bird recovering from a broken wing, every gesture careful, every breath considered. Caleb sat opposite her, by the wood-burning stove, patching up the leather of an old saddlebag. His hands moved with the slow patience of a man who didn't rush anything because he knew most things weren't worth rushing. And the ones that were, they didn't last. He didn't speak, not yet. She watched him with those eyes of hers, deep brown, the color of river silt after rain. There was a quiet in her now, not of fear, but of waiting, as if she was learning how to live again by watching someone who barely remembered how. I had a little brother, she said suddenly, voice a whisper smoothed by the warm air. Caleb didn't look up, but he stopped stitching. Emilio, she continued. He used to sell pan dulce outside the chapel in Mesilla. He had this grin real crooked, like he knew a joke and couldn't decide if it was safe to tell. Caleb let the silence stretch between them like taut leather. He died during a fever last winter. Mama passed not long after. That why you left Doña Ana? He asked quietly. She nodded. No reason to stay after that. I was working for a family out near Hatch, the kind with a ranch big enough to lose a horse on. I cooked, cleaned, kept quiet. Then, you always keep quiet? Caleb asked, glancing at her now. Only when it matters, she said with a hint of a smirk. He gave a half chuckle, like the sound had gotten stuck in his throat on the way out. They trusted me, Serafina continued. That's why it was easy for the sheriff to believe I was involved. Who else would have known the route that Coach was taking? What time it would leave? And you didn't? He asked. I swear to God and every saint that ever breathed I didn't, she said, voice trembling at the edges. But they didn't care. The bandits disappeared. The money vanished. and I was the only brown-skinned girl who knew what the inside of that house looked like. Caleb didn't reply. The truth sat heavy between them like iron left out in the sun. After a pause, she added, softer this time, "They came for me at night. I don't know who told them where I was. Could have been a ranch hand. Could have been the wife. Someone with a soft voice and a hard conscience." "You see their faces?" Caleb asked. She shook her head. "Scarves, hats. One of them. He smelled like cloves and grease, like my uncle's workshop. He said something in English, called me witness bait." Caleb's jaw tensed. She saw it. "But you know the worst part," she whispered. "The dirt. It presses in so slow you don't even realize your lungs are failing. It gets in your ears, your eyes, your prayers." "Yeldes." Her voice cracked. Not loud. Just enough. He stood, crossed the room, and placed a tin mug of fresh water beside her. She took it without meeting his eyes. She didn't need to. The gesture was enough. "You said you lost men," she said, her voice steadier now. He nodded once. "Galena Ridge. We were sent to move supplies to a frontier outpost. Should have been a 2-day ride. One of us sold the route to the Comancheros. I woke up buried under 3 others, crawled out through the legs of my horse." Serafina didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her hand found the rosary on her wrist and tightened. Caleb returned to his saddlebag, but his mind wasn't on the leather anymore. "For a long time, I thought I should have died there with them." "Then why didn't you?" He looked up at her, really looked. Her hair had fallen loose from its braid, curling around her collarbone. The neckline of her dress, now cleaned and patched, still bore the reddish tint of desert clay. Her fingers were small, but her grip on the mug was firm. "Steady. Maybe for this," he said. Serafina tilted her head. "For what?" "For digging someone else out." There was silence again. But this time, it felt like a porch swing after sundown's weighing, warm, alive with the possibility of conversation. She exhaled slowly. "You ever think about leaving?" Caleb scratched his jaw. "Used to. Got as far as Albuquerque once. Drank whiskey at a place called the Hollow Horse. Watched a man get shot over a hand of queens. Realized I didn't belong out there anymore." "Then where do you belong?" He looked out the window. The desert spread endless, and gold beyond the broken glass. A hawk circled high above, just a dot in the shimmering blue. "Nowhere's safe," he said. "But here. I know the rules." Serafina traced the rim of her mug. "You don't trust easy, do you?" He looked at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You were buried to your chin, and still holding on to a satchel like it was salvation. I'd say we're both a little cautious." She laughed. It was soft, caught somewhere between disbelief and release. He watched her. She was still thin, shoulders sharp, cheekbones hollow, but the spark in her had returned. Maybe it had never left. Maybe it had just gone underground for a while, like desert water waiting out the sun. "I'm not staying long," she said eventually. "I figured, but I won't leave tonight." He nodded. They didn't speak after that. But later, as the moon slid between the clouds and the night settled over the shack like a heavy quilt, Caleb noticed something. The rosary was no longer wrapped around her wrist. It was looped gently over the bedpost, beside her sleeping hand. And for the first time in what felt like years, Caleb let the fire burn itself out without keeping his rifle within reach. Night had a way of wrapping around Quicksand Valley like a noose-tight, dry, and silent except for the low groan of the desert shifting under its own weight. The kind of silence that made a man's skin itch. Somewhere outside, a coyote yipped once and was answered by nothing. Caleb hadn't slept. He'd been sitting at the table long after Serafina had curled up beneath the patched quilt, her breaths even and soft, one arm tucked under her cheek like a child's, the fire casting flickers of gold across her face. The moonlight leaking through the warped wood slats carved her into something almost holy, almost untouchable. But his bones knew better. Somewhere out there, the world hadn't forgotten him. He was whittling a strip of mesquite wood, not for use, just for rhythm, when Dusty whinnied low outside. A rustle of brush, the creak of saddle leather, then silence again. His knife stopped. Caleb stood, slow as dusk. No sudden movement. His hand reached for the Winchester leaning against the door from an oat panic. just habit. He moved toward the window, barefoot. Every floorboard a memory underfoot. The yard was empty, but the kind of empty that felt arranged. Then, a voice, low, gruff, twisted with Texas drawl and bad whiskey. "Evenin', Stone. Thought you died out at Galena." The name hit him like a slap across the back. Caleb didn't speak. "I was hoping you had. But damnation, fate's got a real sense of humor." The shadows peeled back from the figure standing 10 paces beyond the fence. Black duster, spurs like teeth. A scar shaped like a broken crescent moon split the man's lip, giving him a perpetual half-grin. One Caleb had seen before splattered with blood and powder smoke. Jude Kincaid. The traitor. Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. "You got a funny way of knocking," Caleb said finally, his voice low, gravel slicked with frost. Jude chuckled. "Didn't reckon I'd be welcomed, so I skipped the manners. You came to finish the job?" "Maybe." He stepped forward, boots crunching dry underbrush. "But maybe I came looking for something else." "Bo." From the cot, a rustle. Serafina stirred, eyes blinking open in the half-light, then froze when she heard the voice. Caleb's posture changed just enough for her to feel a tense, coiled, ready. Jude caught the shift, smiled wider. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, drawing the word out like molasses. "That her? The little dove that flew the coop?" Caleb stepped onto the porch. "She's under my roof." Jude tilted his head. "Ain't that sweet? But you and I both know, Stone, this ain't about her." "You reckon she'd disagree?" "She's just a bonus." A pause. Then Jude's voice dropped. "You remember Galena Ridge?" Caleb didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. 16 good men dead, because you rode off before sunrise." "I didn't ride nowhere," Jude spat. "I was told to pull back. Orders." "You lied." "I survived." Caleb's grip on the rifle trembled once, just enough to notice. "You sold us," Caleb said. "Don't dress it in military lace. You handed us over like cattle." Jude's face twitched. "They offered gold, Stone, real coin, not paper promises. I did what any man would do when his country forgot him." "No," Caleb said, voice like thunder before the break. "You did what a coward does." A silence heavy as the sun at high noon settled between them. Then Jude grinned again, teeth yellow under moonlight. "Well, seems you ain't the only one with ghosts." "Nell." He pulled something from his coat leather, worn, familiar. Serafina's satchel. She gasped behind the door. Caleb didn't turn. He didn't need to. "I know what's in it," Jude drawled. "That little compass? Cute. But the real gem's the paper tucked inside." Caleb's mind whirled, but his face remained stone. "You're after gold," he said. Jude's eyes gleamed. "What else is worth dying over? You killed a family for that. They were in the way. You buried her alive. Lie. Best way to keep a secret quiet." From behind Caleb, Serafina stepped out, barefoot, wrapped in the quilt, chin high. "Give it back," she said. Jude blinked, then laughed. "You got fire, girl. I'll give you that. But this ain't yours." She stepped down the porch. Caleb moved, but she raised a hand. "Number, he wants the truth. Let's give it to him." Caleb looked at her, and for a second, the desert went quiet. The wind, the stars, even the breath of the night waited. She spoke, slow, clear. "My father wasn't just a muleteer. He was part of the old Confederacy. Ran gold up to Colorado, hid some down here during retreat. He left maps, pieces of them. One's in that compass, the other's in the cross on my rosary." Jude's eyes narrowed. "I heard your boys talking the night they buried me. They didn't know what they had, just that you'd want it." She stepped closer. "You killed your own, Jude. You buried the rest, but you left one alive." "Lev." "I can fix that," he hissed, hand going for his belt. Caleb moved faster. The Winchester cracked once. A shot meant not to kill, but to wound. Jude fell to one knee, gun clattering against rock. Serafina didn't flinch. Caleb walked forward, slow. "You're not dying tonight, Kincaid. That's too easy." Jude groaned, clutching his thigh. "You gonna turn me in?" he spat. "Number, we're gonna let the valley have you." Serafina stepped beside Caleb, her voice stale. "There's a patch of sand out east, the kind that doesn't like to give things back." Jude's face pallid. Caleb turned to her. You sure? She nodded. And for the first time, Caleb saw something new in her not survival. Command. Together, they dragged Jude across the dry wash, through the skeleton mesquites, out to a spot where even the air seemed thinner, a place the old people called La Boca de la Tierra, the mouth of the earth. They didn't say a prayer, they just let him sink, and he did slow, thrashing, screaming curses, swallowed one grain at a time. When silence returned, Serafina stood beside Caleb, the wind tugging at her hair, moonlight dancing in her eyes. He looked at her. You sure you want to keep running? He asked. She shook her head. No, she whispered. Not anymore. And for the first time, neither of them felt like a ghost. Dawn didn't break in Quicksand Valley so much as seep in, like whiskey poured slow over a scarred wooden bar, thick, amber, silent. It filtered through dust-coated windows and found them still awake, backs against the wall of Caleb's shack, boots side by side, their breath visible in the early chill. The gunpowder stench from the night before still lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of scorched mesquite and sweat-drenched linen. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Sometimes silence wasn't an absence, it was a reckoning. Serafina sat with her knees tucked to her chest, the quilt pooled around her waist, strands of hair falling wild across her temple. Her eyes weren't restless anymore. They were wide open, watching, calculating, remembering. A woman who'd tasted death, now chewing on the flavor of vengeance and finding it bitter. Caleb, seated beside her, leaned his head against the wall, arms crossed tight over his chest, jaw shadowed in two-day stubble. The tension in his shoulders hadn't left since the shot fired. He kept hearing it. The click, the recoil. The way Jude fell like a sack of sinsloud, ugly, unfinished. You sleep? He asked finally, voice graveled with fatigue. Not the kind that counts, she murmured. He nodded, unsurprised. Then, after a breath, we can't stay. She looked at him. He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. There's always more. More men like Jude. Gold turns men into beasts. And word's gonna spread. Serafina's fingers tightened around the satchel, now returned to her possession. Then we leave. Where? She hesitated. The map says east, toward El Malpais. He exhaled. That land's black rock and bad luck. Folks say even the wind doesn't come back once it goes in. She gave a half smile. I'd rather face lava beds than another man with clove breath and a short fuse. They packed fast. By mid-morning, the sun was burning a hole through the sky, the kind that stripped paint from wagons and hope from the hearts of travelers. Caleb loaded Dusty with the essentials: jerky, cartridges, a copper flask of well water, a single blanket. Serafina brought her satchel, now with the compass tucked inside and the rosary wrapped tightly around her wrist like a charm against madness. They didn't speak as they rode. The desert stretched open like an unspoken promise, both cruel and full of possibility. Around them, the land shifted from pale gold to broken ochre, brush growing thicker, spikier. Joshua trees stood like silent watchmen, arms frozen mid-prayer. Hours passed. The sun climbed. Sweat slicked Caleb's neck beneath his collar, soaked into the band of his hat. Serafina sat tall behind him, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist-knot for affection, but balance. Yet even through leather and cotton, he felt the weight of Herthe fragility, the presence, the tension wound like thread between them. They stopped by sundown near a dry riverbed carved into the land like a forgotten scar. As Caleb tied Dusty to a jutting rock, Serafina walked the perimeter, her boots leaving light prints in the sand. Her eyes scanned the horizon, always watching now. She didn't speak unless necessary. That had changed. When he lit a small fire, she crouched beside him, holding a tin cup. "Why didn't you kill him?" she asked, eyes fixed on the flame. He didn't answer immediately. Then, because the sand was slower, she looked up. "I wanted him to feel it," he added. "What it's like, to be swallowed." Serafina nodded. Not in agreement, not in praise, just in understanding. The fire crackled. "Caleb," she said after a pause, "you don't have to follow me, you know. The map, the gold, the ghosts, it's my burden." He turned to her slowly, the firelight carving half his face into shadow. "No, it's ours now." The words hung in the air, soft, but heavy, like rain clouds waiting. Just then, a sound-sharp, deliberate click. Metal on rock. Caleb stood in a heartbeat, pistol drawn. Serafina mirrored him, pulling the small derringer Caleb had gifted her earlier that day from her boot. From the rise above them, a figure emerged, slight, older, wrapped in a long duster and wide hat. Hands up. Don't shoot, he croaked. Ain't armed. Then step down slow, Caleb ordered. The old man obeyed. His boots crunched gravel as he came closer, the lines on his face deep as canyon etchings, his eyes cloudy with age but gleaming with something else recognition. You're the girl, he said to Serafina, from Hatch. Caleb tensed. Serafina didn't blink. Who are you? Name's Abram. I knew your father. Rode with him once, long time ago, near Fort Craig. He was a decent man, smuggled medicine to miners when the Union left him to rot. She lowered the gun, but only a little. Why follow us? Abram held up a crumpled Paparan old sketch, a younger version of her father, standing beside two other men. One of them had Caleb's eyes. I came for this, Abram said, tapping the paper. To warn you, that map, it's a lie. Caleb narrowed his gaze. Explain. The Confederates hid gold, yes, but the map's not where it is, it's where it was. Before the lava took the valley, that whole canyon's been swallowed. Serafina's breath caught. Then, there's no treasure? Oh, there's treasure, Abram whispered, but it ain't gold. He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to Serafina. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. A journal, faded, Spanish handwriting, her mother's name on the first page. Serafina fell to her knees. The pages revealed stories of love, of escape, of betrayal. Her mother had once been promised to a soldier, but fled when she learned of his crimes. She hid, raised Serafina under a new name. The satchel had always been more than a map, it was a key to history buried deeper than coin. As she read, tears slid down her cheeks, not of grief, but of recognition, of being found. Caleb crouched beside her. You okay? She smiled through it, voice barely above wind. I finally know who I am. Abram stepped back. That's what your father wanted. For you to find truth, not metal. He tipped his hat. I've done my part. And with that, he vanished into the desert like smoke. That night, under stars sharp enough to cut skin, Serafina sat beside Caleb, her head on his shoulder, the journal in her lap. There's no gold, she whispered. No, he said, but I'm rich. Caleb looked at her, her silhouette carved in firelight and dusk. You always were. Zero. And for those still riding with us through this Wild West stories, if your heart beats for stories of survival, redemption, and love forged in the dust, comment. And keep your saddle ready for next part. The morning broke gently, not in blinding beams or grand fanfare, but in soft whispers of light filtering through juniper and red rock, dusting the desert floor in pale gold, like flowers sifted slow over a forgotten table. The wind moved quieter now, brushing over the ash of last night's fire like a mother tucking in a restless child. And there, among the silence, between two sleeping bedrolls and a journal filled with old truths, the weight of the world shifted. Caleb Stone stood just beyond the camp, one boot propped against a smooth boulder, arms crossed, watching the horizon as if waiting for something he couldn't name. The map was folded neatly in his back pocket, not for direction anymore, but for memory, a relic from a life they'd buried like a snake's shed skin. Behind him, the rustle of a blanket and the soft scrape of movement told him Serafina was stirring. She didn't speak right away, didn't need to. The space between them no longer required filling. Some silences, after all, were not empty, but full of things finally understood. She joined him barefoot, the hem of her skirt brushing her ankles, her hair still mussed from sleep, falling loose around her shoulders like riverweed caught on driftwood. Her eyes were soft in the morning haze, lips parted not in speech, but in breath-deep, steady, certain. Caleb glanced sideways. You read it all? She nodded, twice. He waited. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she folded her arms, mirroring his stance, and stared into the horizon like she was carving her own line across it. My mother loved a man who loved war more than her. She ran, Not from shame but to protect something more fragile than herself. Which was? Hope, she whispered. Me. Caleb nodded slowly, as if the words found a familiar echo somewhere deep in his ribs. And your father? Serafina's jaw tensed. He never came back. Left his gold. Left his name. But the journal. It's full of his promises. He looked at her, careful not to move too fast, like a wild horse drawn to water. And what'll you do with them? Her answer came like thunder wrapped in silk. I'll break them. I'll write new ones. There was a stillness in her now. Not the fearful stillness of prey, but the grounded quiet of a tree that survived lightning. Her spine straightened. Her breath slowed, and her heart, could tell, was no longer running. Caleb turned back to the view. There's still time to go after it, you know. The rest of the gold. If it exists. I don't want it. That's so? She stepped closer, her shoulder brushing his. I carried that satchel like a lifeline. Thought it'd save me. Thought it'd buy me justice. Turns out it just weighed me down. And now? Now, she said, I want something that doesn't vanish in fire or fade on parchment. He looked down at his hands, scarred, rough, meant for rifles and rope. Like what? She didn't answer with words, just reached for his hand and slipped her fingers through his, like it had always belonged there. His breath caught not in shock, but in recognition, like finding an old photograph behind a mirror. Something that had waited patiently to be remembered. They spent the next days not chasing treasure, but gathering wood, drying meat, mending torn seams, and listening to birds, to wind, to each other. They spoke less and heard more. Serafina began humming while she cooked songs her mother once sang in the kitchen, full of cinnamon and forgiveness. Caleb started carving again, not out of nervous habit, but purposely shaping pieces of wood into tools, handles, bits of furniture, for the lean-to they built together beneath the bend of a red cliff. They settled not far from a spring the old man Abram had pointed out before vanishing. The land was hard, but not cruel. It had room. And they, for the first time in a long while, had roots. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and cast long shadows like fingers reaching across time, Serafina pulled the journal from the wooden crate where she kept her things. She opened to the final page and began to write, not as a daughter lost, but as a woman found. We buried the map, not because it lied, but because it no longer mattered. Let the next man dig for gold. We're building something you can't hold in your fist, can't shoot for, can't hang from a gallows. We're building peace. Caleb watched her from the porch of their new home. Not much, just 4 walls and a roof, patched with hides, but it was enough. He watched the way she sat, one leg tucked under her, lips pursed slightly as she wrote, like each word pulled something holy from her chest. He watched the way her hair caught the light and refused to fall in a straight line. And he thought about the first time he'd seen her, neck deep in death, yet staring straight into him like she was the one deciding if he was worth saving. He rose, crossed the short distance between them, and sat beside her on the step. She didn't look up, just rested her head on his shoulder. We should name it, she said. The place, the life. He smiled, a small thing, carved from years of rust. Any ideas? She tapped the journal with the end of her pencil. Valle de los que vivieron. He blinked. What's that mean? The valley of those who lived. He nodded. Fitting. A long quiet passed between them. Then she added, I don't think we're ghosts anymore. No, he said. We're the story they'll whisper around the fire. Not for the treasure, but for the ending. Lick. And if this ending stirred something in your chest, if you believe the West wasn't just dust and gunfire, but second chances and silent hearts, learning to beat again, drop a 1 and ride with us to the next story on Wild West Love. But even in the stillness, even in the soft unraveling of days stitched together by routine and warmth, the West never stayed quiet for long. It began with a set of hoofbeats, far off, distant as thunder beyond the mesas, but distinct the rhythm of more than one horse. Caleb heard it first, his ears sharper than most men's after years of watching the horizon for shadows that didn't belong. He rose from the fence line where he'd been coiling rope, hand resting on the grip of his revolver, gaze narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. Serafina stepped out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron, sensing the tension in him before the sound even reached her ears. Dust curled on the horizon like smoke, moving fast, not with the aimless wander of a cattle hand or the easy pace of a traveler but with purpose. "They're not locals," Caleb murmured, voice low but steady. "No," Serafina answered, already reaching behind the door for her rifle. "They're riding like they know what they want." She glanced at him, and for a moment, something flickered between them, not fear, not exactly, but readiness. Like two old wolves sensing a threat too close to the den, like people who had outrun death once, but knew it never stopped chasing for long. "What if they're just passing?" she asked, still watching the dust. Caleb's hand closed tighter around the grip. "And what if they're not?" Inside the cabin, the journal lay open on the table, the ink on the last line still drying. Peace is not the absence of pursuit, it's the strength to turn and face it when it comes. Serafina had written that just this morning. And now, as the thunder of hooves drew closer and the sun slanted hard across their little patch of hard-won quiet, she looked to Caleb. "If they've come to take it," she said, voice low but fierce, "they'll have to earn it." He nodded once, the corner of his mouth twitching, not quite a smile, but close, letting comb. And somewhere behind them, beneath the red cliff and the whispering trees, the desert held its breath once more. The dust plume grew taller, wider, splitting the horizon like a wound reopening. The kind of mark that said trouble wasn't coming, it was already here. Caleb stepped forward, boots crunching dry gravel, eyes locked on the blur of shapes forming in the amber light. 3 riders, maybe 4, close enough now that the shine of their rifles glinted in rhythm with the hoofbeats. Serafina stood just behind him, the rifle in her hand steady despite the storm gathering. Her white apron fluttered in the wind, a stark slash of innocence against the wild color of the land. But her eyes, those, were battle-hardened, the kind of eyes that had watched fires burn and didn't blink. Caleb tilted his head. "They've been riding hard, dust on the hats, fresh sweat on the horses. They're not coming for coffee," she said quietly. "Number. And they're not scouts. They're tight formation, military-style riders who know how to move without wasting a heartbeat." She glanced up at him. "You still think we can talk 'em down?" He didn't answer. Just slid the revolver from his holster, checked the chamber, 6 bullets. "As always, let's just hope they're here for something they can walk away with," he said. The riders reined in just short of the gate. 4 men, dusty, armed, their horses snorting, restless. The one in front wore a black duster and a red kerchief around his throat, dark stubble shadowing a face carved by desert sun. His gaze swept over the cabin, the corral, then landed on Caleb with a practiced kind of cold. "You Caleb Ward?" the man called out, voice thick with the drawl of someone who'd lived too long without conscience. "I am." "Good. Then I reckon we've found what we're looking for." Caleb didn't move. "You looking for a fight, stranger?" The man grinned, revealing teeth like worn ivory. "Not yet, but I ain't afraid of one." Behind him, one of the other men spat into the dirt. Another adjusted the rifle on his back, slow and deliberate. Serafina stepped forward, standing beside Caleb now, rifle at her hip, eyes locked on the leader. "What do you want?" she asked, voice calm as cooled steel. "We want what's owed," the man said, not even glancing at her. "Land, blood, or both." Caleb's fingers flexed. "There's a grave behind that cabin," he said evenly. 3 men tried to collect what wasn't theirs. "You looking to lie beside them?" A beat passed. Silence hummed like tension in a drawn bowstring. Then the man's smile faded. "Careful, Ward," he said softly. "Some debts ain't buried easy." Caleb looked at him for a long second, then turned to Serafina. "Get the gate," he said. She hesitated. "You sure?" "I'm sure they won't like what they find inside," he murmured. "But I'm done talking through fences." Serafina gave a single nod, then moved slowly toward the gate, her shadow long and sharp in the falling sun. The West didn't forgive. It didn't forget, and today it was about to remember.